Hello everybody and welcome to the deck list here at Playing Board Games. I'm Justin and today I have an Alessandra Zorzi deck to talk to all of you about. I think we dive in, see what's going on, and get things ready. If you don't know, in this series I have been building decks for all the Hemlock Vale investigators that I don't really want to call them like off-meta decks, because they really aren't, but they're just not the initial deck that I thought I would build when I was looking at this investigator. So I took my first idea, threw it out the window, and then I started working on my second idea. I'm going to be continuing this through Hemlock Vale, and then I'm going to be starting again at the core set and going through, seeing as long as you keep supporting it. So if you like this series, make sure to let me know in the comments and liking the video, and then we'll ensure they'll keep going from core set into Dunnage and then on. So why don't we talk about Alessandra Zorzi here today. In this deck, Alessandra Zorzi uses her cool parlaying ways to take down enemies, but she may also have some weapons up her sleeve. Utilize a variety of different tools to plot out your perfect enemy killing turns, and most importantly, look confident doing it. Most of my Alessandra decks have been heavily focused on getting clues, or flexing, or using enemies to, further my game plan. This deck is all about being scrappy and using all the tools that we have to make the perfect turn, whether that be killing the enemy, whether that be evading the enemy, whether that be parlaying with the enemy to delay the enemy, really just depends on how the cookie crumbles. All the expansion we need here you can find on this list. There is a good chunk of change for this one. I think that's kind of like part of Alessandra's way. She's going to use a lot of cards no matter what, because she might randomly touch into a parlay card that's somewhere else in here. And suddenly that's there. There's also notably a card from Return to Path to Carcosa. Feel free to proxy it. They don't print it anymore, and until they do, I'm just going to tell you, hey, print that card out on a piece of paper. Who cares? Until it's available for somebody else to buy, because the return twos for all intents and purposes have been discontinued. Just proxy the card. Just proxy the card for any of the return to stuff. Okay, the level 0 deck, I don't want to spend a lot of time on here, but this is the starting point for this deck. You can find a link to this down in the video description, but again, because this is the level 0 deck, I don't want to spend too much time on here. I mean, with all that said, I'm not going to spend too much time on the XP deck too until we start getting into the individual cards. But this is pretty standard stuff. We have some weapons to kill with, we have some events that we're going to parlay with, and we have some skills that boost our self in different ways. It's actually a pretty good chunk in each section, so there's not one part of our deck that's going to be lacking in terms of asset, event, or skills as we maneuver things together. That stays somewhat close as we get into the other ones. There's only 6 skills, but still a good chunk of assets and events that we're going to be taking advantage of, and all of our skills get their jobs done really well. Let's dive in and start looking at these cards individually by individual. I don't know what's wrong with me. Individually by individual is an actual saying, but let's look at these cards individually and see what's cooking. Let's start by chatting about our actual weapons of choice in this deck. So, this is Alessandra Zorzi, Confident Killer. So we're going to be confident, that's the parlay, and we're going to be killing, that's where the weapons come into play. Obviously, British Bulldog has that synergy with Alessandra and her ability to frequently parlay, but it's also a great weapon of choice because it allows us to use our foot to fight with instead of our fist. Ornate Bow does similarly, but it is the song and dance of needing to reload after firing, but it does deal 3 damage to make up for it. The flow of combat in this deck is really important and a little bit tricky. Enemy management may look differently from turn to turn. Knowing what enemy is handled with a gun, bow, event, or evade can be tough to figure out at first, but it's where the reward of this deck's playstyle lives. I'll touch on this more on other cards as we chat about them. These 2 weapons are pretty standard stuff. If we go back to the deck list quickly, you see I'm actually only running 1 Ornate Bow and 2 British Bulldogs. The reason for that is because Ornate Bows, 6 experience for 2 of them is pretty high, and we would rather find or use other tools to get us there. And luckily, we're going to have some search in our deck as we get to as well. But these are like our 2 actual weapon assets that are going to be doing a portion of our killing. Keeping this further, we got Delilah O'Rourke to keep up our killing part of our deck. Delilah O'Rourke boosts our foot and our fist, and gives us some soak and grants us an additional method of damaging enemies, which is her lightning bolt ability to deal 1 damage to an enemy by paying its evade cost, or 2 if the enemy is exhausted. We have tools to evade to give us the 2 damage version of her ability when we want it, but don't forget, enemies exhaust after attacking, and you can use Delilah abilities then. So whether you soak or someone else soaks, don't be afraid to have someone eat an attack if it means that it's just the best way to use your actions to deal that extra damage. Again, this is where the weird song and dance of this deck comes in. The fact that you're going to need to... It's not a Guardian killing. It's also not like, I mean, it is a rogue killing, but it's also not like a Tony Morgan rogue or a Schizo Tool rogue killing. This is a rogue deck that's gonna like, you're gonna solve enemies in different ways depending entirely on the enemy you draw. So like if you hit an Acolyte, don't even waste a gunshot on it. Just use Delilah or Rourke to kill it. If you find an enemy that has 2 foot, you know, like evade it. Maybe then just start shooting it. If you have an enemy that has like 3 fist, like shoot it with the gun or the bow and then like, you know, try to take it out. It also changes depending on the health of the enemy. This is what I mean like when there's a lot of song and dance and like there's, that's where the big learning curve of this deck exists. And mostly because I can't give full details for every enemy, so try the deck out, see what you're going to do, and you're going to see the challenges that you're going to face, decide what you're going to do in those situations. If it doesn't work that time, maybe try a different one the next time an enemy similarly to that first enemy comes up. Just because, you know, it's all about like learning how to best use your resources. Our next card here is Swift Reload. Swift Reload acts as additional copies, quote-unquote, of our British Bulldogs. Reload is needed. You're going to want to get as much value as you can out of that, so like wait to reload until, you know, it's empty. And then we got Hatchetman. It's a funny little card that has only grown on me over time. It fits perfectly in a package like this because sometimes you're going to need to evade an enemy, so why not get a little damage boost in the process. Works really well with Delilah, allowing her to deal 3 damage with her ability, Take That Zamakona. So like, it just solves the problem, deals 3 damage with Delilah's ability. It's a very nice card. Yes, you can fail, but we're not going to take that into consideration when looking if the card is good or bad for this deck, because I can guarantee you this card is good for this deck. Next up here, we got our more enemy management, starting with Drain Essence. So, Drain Essence is our first parlay card here. Notably, the parlay cards, Alessandra Zorzi gets 1 action each turn to parlay. While we're not going super hard on that in this deck, it does exist. And these are the 3 parlay events that we have here that we're going to talk about first that are part of our enemy management. So, Drain Essence has impressed me pretty much every time I've seen it played. It can be a little bit awkward if you haven't taken damage, but even then, it's just like, that means you're probably winning the game if you haven't taken damage. So it's not going to blow the game away, but it is a good tool for dropping 2 damage on an enemy and healing in the process. This card is actually why I included in the thick of it in our starting level 0 deck, because we're going to take 2 physical trauma, which sounds crazy, right, to go 2 when we could just do 1 and 1. But we're going to take 2 physical trauma because that means our Drain Essence, the first one is always active, and our first one is always going to deal 2 damage. Stir the Pot does a fine impression of Storm of Spirits and Rogues and is a good panic button if you ever need it. So it's also a parlay card as well. And I also usually don't include signature cards in these videos, but Beguile is another tool for enemy management. Even if it's a weird one, don't be afraid to Beguile an enemy if needed. Going back again to the tricky, weird, strange thing of this deck of knowing when do I use what resource and when. Sometimes just use the Beguile, move the enemy to a connecting location, right? And then make some space, right? Like, even though you're not solving a problem by deleting the enemy from the board, if you Beguile an enemy, move it to a connecting location, and then you move to another location, that enemy has essentially been dealt with for that turn, which can allow you to reload your bow or do some other stuff. You can also have the enemy that is Beguiled evade enemies at its location, whether it be itself or another enemy. So don't be afraid to use Beguile as another method in Alessandra's arsenal in this deck, because that additional parlay action can be really nice with Beguile. Keeping this going, let's talk about a few more little fun stuff in here. Obviously, Fine Clothes is really good on Alessandra. She has a lot of cards to play, and you can reduce the test values of those by 2. That's very nice. It's so good that some would argue that Alessandra is only playable with Fine Clothes. I don't want to go into the details of that, but Fine Clothes is good in an Alessandra deck, even if you're only parlaying a little bit. I took this a step further, and I wanted to play with Hidden Pocket. So, you may have noticed earlier, back in our deck list, that we have both copies, we have 2 British Bulldogs and 1 Ornate Bow. And the Ornate Bow takes up a hand slot. Oh no, it takes up 2 hand slots, which means that we can't have our Ornate Bow and our British Bulldog in play at the same time. Oh no! But if we go back just a little bit further, the British Bulldog is illicit, which means that we can sew in a Hidden Pocket into our Fine Clothes to be able to play our British Bulldog as well. It's a lot of pieces we need to assemble the full package, but we have some good card selection coming up in the near future. And also because we have so many different tricks that we can take advantage of to deal with enemies for our enemy management, it's not going to be the worst thing if it takes us a while to get either our Ornate Bow or our British Bulldog into play. So if you don't assemble the combo, don't panic. Don't dig for the combo in your mulligan. As long as you find one weapon, you're probably going to be fine. Let the combo come naturally with your card selection, and you'll probably be able to make it work. Let's dive into the economy of our deck by checking out the parlay cards first. Our curve is on the higher side of this deck. 17 cards cost 2 or more. That is pretty high. But we have a lot of economy options in our deck to help us make our deck able to play all of our cards. Grift is the first card here. It's actionless. I say actionless because it is a parlay, so we can spend our action to do it. And it can give us a good chunk of change. It works really well with manual dexterity and lucky cigarette case. It requires a test on an enemy, but it has a high ceiling for like the amount of resources it can provide you and the other synergies with it in the deck. Motivational speech may look strange with only Delilah in our deck, but this is under the assumption that other players will also be able to play allies, so you can use your free action each turn to allow somebody else to play an ally. You can change this to something else. I think like a motivational speech is actually a pretty easy change for this deck. Like, you don't even need to think, like, just find something you like. But I like it in this one, even though it's just Delilah, but mostly because, like, someone will likely have an ally, and being able to play that ally for actionless is really nice. Continuing into our economy, we have some cards that don't need much explanation, so let's rocket through them. We got Faustian Bargain as an easy 5 resources divided as is best for the team. Unlike Grift, it doesn't require a test, but also unlike Grift, it also adds 2 curse tokens. Don't worry about those tokens too much. Those are probably going to be your clue we're going to draw them, or our values are going to be so high that they're not going to be too much of a problem. Watch This is a personal favorite of mine because it's active economy. That means that you're getting resources while also advancing the game. Like, for example, when you are shooting an enemy with your bow and you're already up, like, I don't know, 5. So you can just throw your Watch This on this to, you know, make sure you're getting those resources. It's very easy to get 3 resources. Well, 6 resources, but you only really actually get 3. But just don't be like... You got to do it at the right time, right? Like, do it on a foot test against a big enemy when you're up really high, or a small enemy when you're up really high. And if you lose it, it's okay. You took the risk, and that's what it's all about. Lastly, Another Day, Another Dollar gives us a boost of resources at the start of the game, just to kind of give us a little bit of a running start. I'll say it whenever I get a chance. Lucky Cigarette Case 3 is one of the strongest cards in the game. It's absolutely wild. While it'd certainly be stronger in this deck if we had lockpicks to trigger consistently, we still have a variety of tools to make it pop. While constantly testing at 7 with our foot tests, our Fine Clothes gives us +2 on tests, and Suggestion will allow us to evade at 8. Put this all together and we'll be digging through 3 to 4 cards commonly each turn, which is where our card selection gets really powerful. If you again look at the top 3 and choose one every turn, that's a good way of finding the cards that you want. Manual Dexterity 2, the upgraded version, also really nice cards, gives us a burst of card draw when needed and works well with Grift, our weapons, and also Suggestion, which we'll be talking about very soon. By very soon, I mean right now! Did I get you? Did I get you? I think I got you. I included Suggestion in this deck for 2 reasons. One, first, it has good synergy with Lucky Cigarette Case. As stated in the previous slide, with Suggestion and Delilah in play, we are evading at 8. This is a very comfortable number because usually evade values are lower than fight values, so this works really well with with the lucky cigarette case, because, you know, if we're going to go 8, draw -2, the enemy has 2 evade, we're now at 4, we get to look at the top 4 cards of our deck. It's really good for that. The second reason is that Suggestion is another tool of enemy management in this deck. While Suggestion isn't an enemy, like, deletion, it doesn't defeat the enemy, it does give us assurance that we'll be able to evade the enemy, to reload our bow if needed, reload our guns if needed, or gather resources for a parlay event, or even just like take advantage of the Hatchet Man and Delilah as mentioned previous. So you can see, looking at all the pieces together, what I mean when I say that this deck is a little bit scrappier in terms of how it fights. It's not just relying on one thing and just like swinging the hammer to defeat enemies. You gotta have some fun and decide what the best solution to deal with an enemy is when the enemy shows up and what is available to you in your hand and play area, which is what I think makes this deck really interesting. And then it has that little bit of spice, that parlay spice that Alessandra Zorzi brings to it to add another method of enemy management. The last card here, I think this is the last card. There could be something else. We got In the Thick of It. I added to this deck at level 0 because of how it boosts Drain Essence. I use the 3 experience, as I said, to add the Ornate Bow because the Hidden Pocket and Find Close combo is in the deck at level 0, so there's no reason that Ornate Bow can't be in there too. It also gives us another weapon that's pretty good at our level 0 deck. Talking about our upgrade order, as always, this is just like a suggested upgrade order. I do think that like you should always upgrade your deck depending on how you play it, how you see it played, what gaps you might need it, and also feel free to change up the deck. This is just a deck idea for you to explore with depending on how you do it. I would change my 2 stall for times for Delilah's. I upgraded my British Bulldogs, turned my Unexpected Courages into Swift Reloads, upgraded my Lucky Cigarette Case to the Lucky Cigarette Case 3, upgraded the manual decks, changed my Disguise to Suggestions. You can see it's actually a pretty late upgrade because I think Disguise does a very similar job to Suggestion, and some could even argue that it's better, right? Like some could even argue that like Disguise is fine, so you could definitely change it out, but luckily it's pretty cheap for an upgraded experience. And then the last thing I added was just that another day, another dollar to give us that last little boost. And there's the deck. Yeah, I think I've said everything that I have to say about it. I think it's really neat. I had some fun putting it together, and it's just like a fun rogue deck. You're gonna have a great time with it if it does interest you. Oh no, I spelled beguile Bagul on the slide? Does that mean I'm gonna get killed by the Bagul? If you don't know that, there's a film called Sinister, which is so good for the first 60% of it, and then it gets really bad. It gets really bad, but it's so good for that 60%. Like it's like I was like, I'm watching the best horror movie I've seen in my entire life, and then it just sucked. Anyways, keep your eyes open. In 2 weeks I'll be releasing a Kahaku deck, and then 2 weeks after that we'll be talking about Hank Sampson. There's a little like approximately 2 weeks. Again, I'll be looking at Beyond My First Instinct for these decks, and then I am planning on continuing this into Core Set. If you want to see further, make sure you support the video. It's a great way for me to know that you like what you see. Let me know what you think of the deck as well. Love to hear your thoughts on Alessandra Zorzi, and if you think she'd be fun to play as her confident killer self. Huge thank you to all of our patrons for supporting the channel, and a huge thank you to all of you for watching this video. Thank you so much for everything. Have a great one, and as always, a GG's.